Hi, welcome to our last segment related to Greek art. We left off talking about the late classical period as well as the beginning of the Hellenistic period. We looked at the altar of Pergamon that depicted the giant, let me see if I can find it, yeah, um, of the dichotomy frieze, the altar of Zeus, done by the Pergamon sculptors. And so this is Hellenistic. I think I was sort of unclear about that. And this is relief sculpture. What we're going to look at in this segment is freestanding Hellenistic sculpture. We know little of the development of sculpture during the first 100 years of the period, and by this point it is hard to pinpoint a single style due to the dispersion of Greek artists and the melding together of Greek and local styles. But some general characteristics can still be noted when we think of Hellenistic art. Highly developed expressiveness, this idea of emotional appeal, greater variety of drapery. So there's, the drapery seems a bit more animated. Greater variety of poses, often marked by the twisting of the body. You definitely can sort of see that in the relief sculpture from the altar of Zeus. The willingness by the sculptor to experiment. A wide variety of subject matter, and a less idealized but more human conception. And so we talked about this when we compared Polyclitus's Doryphorus, and we are going to look at this another sculpture in a second. What did I compare? Oh my God, what did I compare it with? Oh, the seated boxer. And we talked about the sort of, how the seated boxer was a little bit more humanistic and not as depicted as heroic. So this is an example of Hellenistic free standing sculpture. This is Egg Piganosis, I guess that's how you say his name. And this is a Gallic chieftain killing himself with his wife. Again, this is a Roman marble copy of a bronze, and we really do start to see these characteristics. It's very expressive, definitely a greater variety of poses. I think we can see the anguish in the facial expressions. And again, the sculpture, the subject matter is more, there's more variety. It's not necessarily an athlete or heroic male youth, but a variety of subject matter. In this case, a foreigner, and this idea of war, and also this idea of a chieftain killing himself because he's lost the battle. This is one of my favorite Hellenistic works of art. You've probably seen it before. It's the Nike alighting on a warship. It's very famous. It's located at the Louvre in France, in Paris. And it's also called Nike of Samothrace, and that's the city where it was made. Originally shown having just descended to the prow of a ship, which was placed among rocks in the center of a fountain. It was this Nike figure was erected by the people on the teeny Aegean island of Samothrace to commemorate a naval victory. Remember, a Nike figure, this sort of angel figure, was also known as a winged victory, so it often was used to symbolize some sort of victory. The movement of the landing is shown by the action of the wind and the still open wings and the wind-blown drapery of the goddess. So again, it's a very dramatic sculpture and very much fits in with the Hellenistic characteristics I just went over earlier. The invisible force of onrushing air has become a tangible reality. There's an active relationship indeed, an interdependence between the statue and the space that envelops it, that we haven't really seen with other sculptures. The Nike of Samothrace deserves all of her fame as probably one of the greatest masterpieces of Hellenistic sculpture, which is why it's on the list of 250 AP works that you have to know. Unfortunately, it's missing arms because they probably were stretched out from the sides for balance and broke off. But even without the arms and head, the body explodes with movement and energy. Again, that sort of wet drapery clings to the body. The figure poses a forward momentum of the body and a powerful backward thrust of her enormous wings. So there's this tension of, moving forward and kind of going backwards as well. The large open movement of the wings with a strong contrast of light and dark is a strong contrast of light and dark on the deeply sculpted drapery as well. Contrasting textures of feather and fabric and skin, are part of this sculpture and very typical of Hellenistic art. And so here you can see some different views of it. I think this view is especially beautiful. And again, with freestanding sculpture, we also have to think about multiple perspectives. And here you can really, I think, get a sense of it being on the prow of a ship. So we're going to look at some other sculpture. This is the Aphrodite, Venus de Milo. This is a really important nude female statue. In the Hellenistic period, sculptors followed by Praxiteles, he was the one who, or no, who did the first nude? Let me go back and look. Oh, sorry, I still haven't got my new computer. Right, slideshow. So the statue of Aphrodite. This was the late classical period, and we talked about how it was unusual because, one, it's a female nude, but also to portray a goddess as more human. It almost looks like a mortal woman taking a bath, and so we'll see how these types of sculptures become even more dramatic. So the Aphrodite, the Venus of de Milo, is a very important sculpture. In the Hellenistic period, sculptors followed by Praxiteles led in undressing the goddess Aphrodite and exploring the female nude figure as well as eroticism. So these are new subject matters. The figure is larger than life, a size marble statue. The base is inscribed with the sculptor's name. Modestly draped, but most overtly sexual compared to the Aphrodite of Cnidos that we just looked at. In her left hand, which is separately preserved, she held an apple awarded to her by Paris when he judged her the most beautiful goddess. Her right hand may have grasped the edge of a drapery near her left hip. And the sculptor designed the work to sort of tease the spectator. So again, we're getting that emotional, we're getting that sort of exaggerated movement. Even though the Aphrodite of Cnidos was completely nude, somehow her being covered up and sort of lifting, the idea of her lifting her drapery is a little bit more seductive and erotic. So we see them sort of exploring those themes as well. And here's another view. Again, this is a really famous statue. And I think it was probably one of the statues that I think was copied the most in the Roman period. All right, so this guy should be familiar. This is the seated boxer. Again, we talked about in the classical period, the traditional theme of the athlete was important, but we can see how it's been expanded in a very novel way. The bronze figure is portrayed as middle-aged, beaten up, and beyond his prime, very different than the Polykleides' Doryphorus that we compared in contrast. He looks very defeated. The sculptor has depicted cauliflower scarring of the ears. I talked about that. That's something that actually boxers get. And it happens over time as they continue to fight. And there's this attention to extreme detail and shown in this sort of realism, radical realism and diversity of life, Hellenistic of life, that Hellenistic art loved to embrace. So we see them really looking at all different subject matters, embracing this sort of anguish, emotion, this sort of hyper-realistic portrayal. And, it's very, very telling of the times. This is during the Peloponnesian Wars. There's a sort of state of decline. They're, coming out of their golden age, and soon the Greek Empire is going to fall apart. And so some scholars think that there's that sort of sense of decline, and that's, it's coming out in this style of Hellenistic art. Again, here are some more views. We talked a lot about this in class, so this should be pretty familiar. And then here is the example of the cauliflower ears I was talking about. And so if we look closely at the statue, let me go back, oops, you should be able to see it. I might not have the best picture, but it's there. So this idea of like, it's not idealized, it's very realistic. The classical period would have never depicted a flaw like that. All right. And here we have, I know it's cutting off the title. This is called Old Market Woman. It dates from 150 to 1000 BCE. And then again, with this figure, we do see the great diversity of subject matter in this period. Early Greeks would have never depicted old age. Again, it would have been idealized and been very useful. We see the emphasis on her loose, wrinkled skin and her sagging breast. Her hair and clothing appeared disheveled. The Hellenistic world was also a very cosmopolitan and urban place, where the wealthy and high status could not help but encounter each other, or encounter the poor and the growing number of foreigners on a daily basis. So you have this sort of interaction of different classes, interacting because it's so crowded and so cosmopolitan and so urban. And I think that's very much reflected in the style of Hellenistic art that we're looking at. And it really shows the Hellenistic impulse for realism. So let me discuss naturalism versus realism. Classical sculptors had a very realistic, natural-looking body that was idealized. Realism portrays subjects with naturalistic bodies and features, but not idealized. So you kind of want to think of naturalism versus, that's how you can think of naturalism versus realism. So again, this would be considered realistic because of her wrinkled, sagging skin and the old age that's being depicted here. All right, and this is my final work. And again, the ones that have stars are the ones that you definitely have to know for the AP exam. But I think it is important for you to understand some of the other pieces, and you can refer into your essays. You can discuss works of art that aren't on the list. And I'm surprised this one isn't. This is one of my favorite Hellenistic sculptures. This is called the Lagoon Group. Again, it's a marble copy. Until the Nike was discovered 100 years ago, that was the most admired work. This was the most admired work of Hellenistic statuary. It was found in Rome in 1506, and it had a huge impact on future artists, Renaissance artists like Michelangelo, with this idea of the twisted figure, the emotional faces, the very detailed anatomy, and obviously influenced other artists as well. This was done by 3 sculptors who were inspired by the Pergamon artists. These were the artists who sculpted the altar of Zeus at Pergamon. And you can see that, especially with that diagonal curve, or that diagonal movement of the central figure. It's a very popular work and has been copied and reproduced. Laocoon was a Trojan priest during the Trojan War. He knew the Trojan horse was a trick and tried to warn the Trojans. The gods who favored the Greeks sent snakes to devour Laocoon and his sons for trying to alter history. Humans were not allowed to intervene, and that really angered the gods, and so this was his punishment. So again, the typical Hellenistic characteristics of the work, we see expressive eyes and anguished faces, skillful unification of a diverse, very complex composition. I mean, there's a lot going on. You have three figures, and they're sort of entwined with these snake figures. I mean, look at this figure sort of trying to pull out of the snake, and this sort of writhing in anguish. But it also, it's balanced, but it's also very dynamic. And again, very expressive, especially when we look at the facial expressions. All right, well, we are finally done with Greek art. We'll be moving on to the Roman period, and so stay tuned.